The doctor begins the autopsy of a woman, but on the autopsy table, her heart starts beating again. So did coming back to life bring you peace or unexpected pain? The clock read just after 9 a.m. The sun was already warming the roof tiles of the simple school where Michaela Ramirez taught. Everyone loved her. She had a sweet manner that made even the most restless students sit quietly just to listen to her. Her smile was gentle, like the wind that moved the curtains in the classroom. That day, as always, she entered the classroom with her notebooks clutched to her chest and a cup of chamomile tea in her hand. "Good morning, my darlings. Ready to learn?" The children answered together, some still sleepy, others smiling as if they knew that with Teacher Mikau, anything was possible. She began to write on the blackboard, explaining something about the planets as she carefully drew each one. A little girl with long braids raised her hand and asked, "Teacher, the Earth spins fast." Michaela turned around, still holding the chalk in her hand, and smiled. "It spins so fast that we don't even feel it. It's like an invisible carousel." Suddenly, she stopped talking. Her hand trembled a little. The chalk fell to the floor and made a sharp sound. A second later, her eyes lost focus. She put her hand to her chest, took 2 wobbly steps, and fell to the floor of the classroom between the children's benches. "Teacher, Teacher Michaela!" The cry of one of the students broke the silence. The children got up, frightened, some crying, others trying to get closer. A school worker ran over while the principal called an ambulance. It all happened very quickly, but it remained etched in each child's memory, as if time had stopped. Michaela did not respond to any calls. Her eyes were closed, her body motionless. A little girl's hand touched hers. "She's really cold," she whispered, her voice trembling. The ambulance arrived minutes later, sirens blaring and rushing as usual. The paramedics rushed in, put Michaela on a stretcher, and took her away urgently. As the children looked out the window, not understanding what was happening, some cried quietly, hugging each other. Outside, the morning continued as if nothing had happened. But inside that school, everything had changed. At the hospital, the atmosphere was one of silence and waiting. Michaela was lying in a white bed, surrounded by wires and machines that beeped from time to time. Her eyes were still closed, her face pale. It was hard to imagine that this woman, so full of life, who filled the classroom with joy, was now lying still as if she were no longer in this world. The doctors had done everything they could. Tests, medication, attempts to wake her up with stimuli, but the days passed slowly, one after another, and Michaela showed no signs of improvement. It was as if she had gone far away to a place where no one knew if she would return. Julian, her husband, did not leave the hospital. He slept, sitting in a hard chair next to the bed. He held her hand every day, as if his warmth could bring back the woman he loved. "My love, if you can hear me, come back to me," he would say in a low voice, his eyes red from crying so much. Michaela's mother, Doña Isabel, was also always nearby. With a rosary in her hands, she prayed non-stop, asking God to bring her daughter back. But time passed. 3 full days went by with no sign of improvement. Then, on the morning of the 9th day, 2 nurses entered the room, walking slowly. One of them saw the monitor. It was off. The other approached Michaela's body and checked her pulse. Then she checked to see if she was breathing. Nothing. They looked at each other, and one shook his head sadly. "There's no heartbeat. I think that's why the monitor is off." The other confirmed it in a low voice. "She's dead." Julian stood up at that moment when he heard that, as if he had been punched in the chest. "No, wait, she can't be. She's not dead," he shouted, grabbing his wife's arm. "Can't you see? She's just asleep. She's going to wake up." The nurses tried to calm him down, but his eyes were filled with despair. "Please, please check her again. Just one more time. She's always had a very weak pulse. It could be hidden." Doña Isabel came running in breathlessly, her eyes wide open. "What's going on?" Julian was crying. "They said she's gone." The woman approached her daughter slowly, as if she couldn't believe it. She touched her face, then her hair, laid her head on Michaela's chest, and remained there in silence. Then she whispered, my girl, come back to me." The nurses wrote something down on a chart. One of them sighed. "We're going to notify the medical examiner. They have to take the body away. And they left the room, leaving behind a mother kneeling at the foot of the bed, crying silently, and a husband with his face hidden in his hands, as if he didn't want to see the reality that had just fallen upon them. Michaela Ramirez was officially dead, but inside that room, no one could accept that truth. Julian paced back and forth in the hospital hallway, his eyes red and his shirt wrinkled. He hadn't eaten in hours and had spent the previous night awake. He sat in a hard chair, staring out the window without seeing anything. His heart felt like it was going to jump out of his mouth. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Michaela's smile, the way she played with words, the sound of her laughter, which now seemed so distant. When they came to take Michaela's body to the morgue, something inside him screamed. "Wait," he said, almost without a voice, as he ran down the hallway. "Please wait a little longer. She's not dead." 2 doctors stood at the door of the room, ready to take her away. One of them tried to calm him down. "Mr. Julian, I know it's difficult, but all the tests have been done. She has no vital signs. There's nothing more we can do." "No," he replied forcefully. "You don't know Michaela like I do. She's always had a weak pulse since she was a child. Sometimes it even seemed like she stopped breathing when she slept." One of the doctors looked at the other impatiently. "We've already followed all the protocol. 2 different professionals confirmed it. You were in the room. There's no mistake." Julian knelt on the floor, his hands clenched, his eyes filled with tears. He seemed to be pleading not only with the doctors, but with God, with life, with time. "Please, just a few more hours. Just that. She's going to wake up. I know it, Mr. Julian. The body needs to be moved. I'm so sorry." He got up slowly, staggering, and approached the bed. He touched Michaela's cold face. He ran his fingers through her hair with a tenderness that hurt. "My love, I'm here. If you can still hear me, come back to me. Come back." But she did not respond, and the doctor's eyes were losing patience. One called 2 nurses to prepare for the transfer. "We're going to take her." "No," Julian shouted, grabbing the sheet. "For God's sake, don't take my wife away. She's not dead. I'm sorry, I swear by everything that is sacred. She's alive." The doctor took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I understand your pain, but the body is already in the process of letting go. We can't wait any longer." Doña Isabel, who was outside, heard the shouting and ran inside. When she saw her daughter covered, ready to be taken away, she burst into tears that broke her heart. "My girl, my God, my girl." Julian took his mother-in-law's hand and said firmly, "You feel it too, don't you? That she's still here?" Doña Isabel, her face covered in tears, looked at her daughter's body and nodded. "I'm sorry. In my mother's heart, she hasn't gone." Silence filled the hallway. The doctors didn't know what to say. Time stood still. It seemed as if the world was waiting for something. Doña Isabel stood there for minutes. Maybe many, maybe few, but enough to fill that moment with love and hope. She ran her fingers through her daughter's hair, carefully smoothed a strand, and repeated, "If you can still hear me, come back to me, daughter. Please come back." Only after a while did she allow them to take her away. But first she leaned over, kissed Michaela on the forehead, and said very softly, "Wherever you are, my voice will find you. I love you, my girl." And there, in that cold hallway, her heart broken with grief, Doña Isabel let them take her daughter's body away, but she never stopped believing for a second that Michaela was still alive. Ernesto Salgado was an experienced medical examiner, but he still felt the weight of every body he examined. He had recently been transferred to this hospital in the countryside, where everything was simpler, quieter, but where the pain was more noticeable. He had seen many things, tragedies, accidents, difficult goodbyes. But that morning, when he received the order to perform the autopsy on a young woman named Michaela Ramirez, something inside him tightened. He entered the cold room with the file in his hand. He read quickly. Teacher, 25 years old, no serious health history, inconclusive diagnosis, sudden death. When he lifted the white sheet covering the body, his eyes paused for a moment. Michaela's face was not that of someone who had passed away peacefully. She looked sad. The color of her skin had hardly changed. Her lips were still pink, and there was something in her expression, a strange calmness that made him frown. Ernesto took a step back as if something had pushed him. He ran his hand over his face and took a deep breath. He spoke to himself in a low voice. Why do I have this feeling? This doesn't make sense. He looked at the instruments on the metal table. Gloves, scalpel, and tweezers. Everything was ready. Everything was as usual. But he couldn't begin. He walked around the stretcher, looking at the details. Michaela's dark hair still shone. Her nails were manicured. There was a discreet wedding ring on her finger, a sign that she was married. He picked up the file again and read it slowly. No signs of trauma, nothing that clearly explained her death. Ernesto approached again and gently touched his arm, even though he already had a death certificate. I don't know, miss. Something here is wrong with you. He put his hand on her neck. He stood silently for a few seconds. Nothing. Everything is so quiet. Too quiet. He sighed. He put on his gloves slowly, as if preparing not only for a procedure, but for something he didn't fully understand. He took the scalpel firmly, but just as he was about to make the first cut, he stopped. The scalpel remained suspended in the air. His hand trembled. Forgive me, he whispered as if talking to someone who could hear him, and then very carefully made the first cut. It was at that moment that everything happened. Just as the blade touched the skin, he felt something strange, a small, almost invisible but real tremor. It was as if a slight impulse came from inside the body. A sign. Ernesto stopped. What? He stood still, staring at the cut. Suddenly he felt something stronger, a pulse. It wasn't his imagination. Michaela's body, which until then had been motionless, twitched slightly. The scalpel fell from his hand and hit the floor with a sharp sound. She's alive! He shouted with all his might, as if he wanted to wake up the entire hospital. Quick, emergency kit. She's alive. Blood. Blood is coming out. Bring me the kit now. 2 nurses who were in the room ran immediately. One of them dropped a metal tray. Ernesto grabbed a clean cloth and placed it over the cut he had made, trying to stop the blood that was beginning to flow. His hand was shaking. His heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to explode. Michaela, hang in there, he said, almost pleading. One of the nurses brought the first aid kit and began to help. Ernesto urgently searched for the stethoscope, placed it on her chest, and held his breath. He listened. It was faint, but it was there. 1 heartbeat, then another. She's breathing. My God, she's breathing. Everyone in the room stood still for a moment, trying to understand what they were seeing. The woman, who already had a death certificate, was alive, very weak, but alive. Ernesto looked around, still sweating, and said loudly, "Call the ICU, now! She's back! She's back!" No one could say a single word. Ernesto's cries were heard throughout the morgue, like fire on dry grass. The sound of the word alive made everyone nearby stop. It was as if the whole world had stopped for a moment. Hurried footsteps began to echo through the hallways. The nurses ran in fear, not understanding how it was possible. A body declared dead, ready for autopsy, was breathing. 2 nurses rushed in, one of them almost tripping over his own feet. The emergency stretcher was quickly pushed into the room. The confusion was clear, but no one asked any questions. "Is she really alive?" asked a nurse, her voice trembling. "Listen to this," he said, handing her the stethoscope. The woman put the device on and, upon hearing the faint sound of a heart beating, she put her hand to her mouth in excitement. "My God, she's here with us." Michaela's body, still weak, was breathing with difficulty, but it was breathing. Her chest rose and fell slowly. The cut Ernesto had made was covered with gauze. The bleeding already stopped with the clean cloth he himself was holding. Everything was done carefully, quickly, but also with great respect. "Let's take her to intensive care," Ernesto said. "And someone call her husband and her mother. They need to know this. She's back." As they carefully pushed the stretcher out of the room, everyone's eyes were fixed on her. A woman who had been given up for dead was coming back to life right in front of them. No one said much. It was as if there were no right words for that moment. But something was clear in Ernesto's gaze. He knew that this day would change everything. The news spread through the hospital corridors like wildfire. Nurses whispered among themselves. Doctors left papers lying around wherever they went, and patients peeked through the doors. The news spread faster than any ambulance. The woman who was dead was alive. Michaela Ramirez, the teacher everyone thought was gone, was breathing with a heart that was still weak but steady. The chaos was not just noise. It was surprise, fear, guilt. In the main office, the hospital director read in disbelief the death certificate signed that very morning. The seal was still wet. The paper said that Michaela had died at 8:45 in the morning, and now it was 10:30, and she was in intensive care, breathing. How is this possible? He muttered, shaking his head, unable to hide his nervousness. In the operating room, Ernesto washed his hands quickly, trembling. His eyes were sunken, as if he hadn't slept in days and was carrying a heavy burden. It wasn't guilt for having made the incision, but for almost letting a life slip away. He knew he should have checked the body first, but the nurses had already declared her dead. Everything was signed. That's how it worked. But that day, it almost cost someone their life. An older doctor entered with her eyes wide open. "Ernesto, do you understand how serious this is?" "I understand everything," he replied, without looking up. "If I had made the incision without stopping, if I hadn't been stopped by that strange feeling, Michaela would be dead right now." "Really? But you were the coroner. The responsibility is yours." He looked at her with contained anger. "I'm a doctor, not a machine. I felt something strange and followed my instinct. And that's what saved her life." Upstairs, Julian had just received the news. He was crying in Doña Isabel's lap, who was clutching a rosary between her fingers. She repeated over and over, "I said she was still here. I felt it. She's alive," said Julian, laughing and crying at the same time. "She's alive." In the midst of all this, the hospital was a whirlwind of relief, shame, and admiration. Some doctors began to question their own methods. Others tried to hide the mistake, but no one could erase what was now visible on everyone's faces. They had almost buried a woman alive, and at the center of it all was Ernesto, who, although he had saved Michaela, was now viewed with suspicion because on paper he was responsible. But in his heart, there was a relief that could not be put into words. "Judge me if you want," he whispered to himself, looking out the window. "But she's alive, and that's what matters." Days after the chaos at the hospital, the light in the room was soft. The curtains were half open, and the sun was coming in little by little, touching Michaela's face like a shy caress. The sound of the machines monitoring her vital signs was the only constant noise. The room was silent, calm, but full of expectation. Doña Isabel slept in a chair next to the bed, her eyes swollen and her hand clutching Michaela's, as if she were afraid she would disappear again. It was then that Michaela's fingers moved slowly, almost without strength. Her still heavy eyes opened little by little. She blinked several times, trying to understand where she was. The light bothered her. Everything felt confusing. The white ceiling, the smell of the hospital, the muffled voices in the hallway. Everything was strange. "Mama." The voice came out softly, almost like a whisper. Doña Isabel opened her eyes wide, got up quickly, and looked at her daughter. "Micaela, Micaelita, can you hear me?" The young woman looked around with eyes full of fear. "What's going on? Where am I?" Doña Isabel began to cry again, but this time it was out of relief. She caressed her face with all the care in the world. "You're in the hospital, my daughter. You're alive, thank God. You're back with us." Michaela frowned in confusion. She tried to move, but her body was still weak. "I don't remember anything. Why? Why am I here?" Doña Isabel hesitated a little, but she didn't want to scare her. "You fainted, Micaela. It was serious. We thought we had lost you." The girl was silent for a few seconds. Then she brought her hand to her chest as if searching for something inside herself. "I had a dream, I think, but it was so real, so strange. I felt like I was trapped somewhere, alone." Julian entered the room at that moment with red eyes, and his heart beating faster than ever. Seeing his wife's eyes open, he brought his hand to his mouth and knelt beside the bed. "My love, you're back." Michaela looked at him, but her expression was one of fear. "It's me, Julian, your husband, my love. I'm here with you." She closed her eyes and turned her face away. Frightened, she didn't seem to recognize even her own voice. "I don't know, I'm scared. Everything is strange." The following days were very difficult. Michaela often woke up crying, not knowing where she was. Sometimes she remembered something, then forgot it. Sometimes she screamed when she saw her reflection in the mirror, as if she saw a stranger. She was even afraid of the sound of the door opening. Everything scared her. Everything was uncertain. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said once, her voice trembling. Doña Isabel sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand, and replied, "You are my daughter, and you are alive. That's enough. We'll rebuild the rest together." The days in the hospital became increasingly crowded with people, reporters, cameras, photographers, all wanting to see the teacher who had returned from the dead. So they said. Michaela, who could barely stand without getting dizzy, now had to listen to knocks on the door every half hour. "Ms. Michaela, can you say a few words to us? What was it like to come back to life? Remember, you saw the other side." She closed her eyes and turned her face away. She didn't want to answer, nor did she know how. What she felt was nothing like a miracle. It was fear. It was confusion. It was a hole in her chest that no one could see. Julian tried to protect her by stopping the journalists at the door. "Give her some space. She's still recovering, for God's sake." But the curious onlookers continued as if her pain were a spectacle. Michaela just wanted peace. She just wanted to understand why she woke up at night with her heart racing, why she had strange dreams with voices she didn't recognize, why she felt a knot in her chest every time someone talked about a miracle. A nurse came in one afternoon with a forced smile. "Michaela, there's a famous TV show out there. They want to do a nice story about you. It could change your life." She closed her eyes and replied in a low voice, "My life has already changed, and I didn't ask for it." The nurse tried to insist, but Doña Isabel got up from her chair and said firmly, "My daughter needs silence now, not cameras. Give her time." Michaela took a deep breath. She was tired. Tired of the labels, the questions, the stares. Everyone expected her to smile, to give thanks for being alive, to talk about faith, light, rebirth. But she barely knew where she was, barely remembered herself, and what she did remember hurt. One night, alone in her room, she looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "If this is a miracle, why does it hurt so much?" Tears rolled down her face without force. Michaela didn't want to be news or a symbol of faith. She just wanted to recognize herself in the mirror, sleep through the night, go back to being who she was before. But even that seemed far away. What the world saw as a miracle for her was just an emptiness that was difficult to explain. Julian did everything he could to protect Michaela. He slept on a hard chair next to her bed. He brought her water, held her hand in the early hours of the morning when she cried, faced journalists, doctors, curious people, anyone who approached her with lots of questions or prying looks. He wanted to do everything right. He wanted to be a refuge, but even though he loved her very much, he couldn't understand what Michaela was feeling. She was quiet, locked in a silence that hurt. Sometimes she would stare out the window for hours. Other times she would turn to the wall and stay there without saying anything. Julian tried to talk to her, to remember nice things from the past, but the answer was always the same, a weak smile or nothing. "Do you remember when we went to the beach and you were scared of the crab?" he said one night, trying to get a smile out of her. "I don't want to remember anything right now," she replied, without even looking at him. He took her hand. "I just want to see you, Guel, my love, to see you smile again." She let go of his hand, gently but firmly. "I don't know how to smile anymore." Julian felt a knot in his heart. It was as if with each passing day, the woman he loved was drifting further away, not physically but inside, as if she were going to a place he couldn't reach. In the weeks that followed, it only got worse. She began to get upset by simple questions. She shut down every time he said, "It will pass," or "Everything will be fine." "Don't say that, Julian. You don't know how I feel. No one knows. But I'm here. I'm trying to understand you. Trying is not the same as feeling." He remained silent. It hurt because he just wanted to help, but he felt like everything he did was wrong. He began to walk more through the hospital corridors, spending more time outside the room to give her space. But inside, he was falling apart. One early morning, he cried in the hospital bathroom, sitting on the cold floor with his head between his knees, whispering, "I'm losing her." and there's nothing I can do. The love that united them was strong, but the trauma left by the death that did not happen was stronger than pretty words. Julian was still there, but now outside Michaela's pain, not knowing how to get in, not knowing if she still wanted him inside. Inside the hospital, it seemed like everyone was talking about it, but few knew what to do. The bosses were torn between the embarrassment of the mistake and the fear of public opinion. In the end, how could they explain that a woman was pronounced dead and woke up on the autopsy table? In the midst of all this, Ernesto Salgado, the doctor who shouted for help, who grabbed Michaela's hand and felt her pulse return, was now being called out and held responsible. He received an official notice early in the morning, delivered by a serious employee who didn't even look him in the eye. He had to appear before the hospital commission. They were going to review his conduct. Ernesto read the paper and let out a half-hearted laugh. I saved a life, and now they want to know why I didn't follow the rules. The meeting was at the end of the week. He entered the room with his gown still dirty from his shift, his face tired, but his head held high. Across the table were 3 hospital directors, all with serious expressions. Dr. Ernesto, one of them began in a firm voice. The decision to begin an autopsy without a new medical examination goes against hospital protocols. Ernesto didn't blink. I followed the sheet they gave me. I had a death certificate. 2 nurses signed it. I didn't make the decision alone, but you didn't do your part, and you abruptly stopped the procedure, shouting, causing alarm in the room. I stopped it because I felt the pulse of a woman who had been declared dead. That alarm saved her life. A heavy silence filled the room. One of the directors leafed through some papers, trying to look calm. We are investigating whether it was negligence or just luck. Ernesto crossed his arms and stared. Call it what you want. Luck, instinct, your mistake. What matters is that she's alive. And if I had followed protocol to the end, today you would be explaining how you buried a woman alive. The phrase hung in the air like a slap in the face. No one responded. But at that moment, Ernesto already knew that even though he was the hero of the story, he was alone. Most preferred to keep up appearances, control the signed paper, rather than accept that they had been wrong. That night, as he left the room, he ran into Julian in the hallway. Michaela's husband hugged him tightly with tears in his eyes. Thank you for not following the paper. Thank you for listening to your heart. Ernesto took a deep breath and replied with tears in his eyes. Sometimes that's all we have, our heart. Michaela's nights were no longer what they used to be. She slept little, and when she did manage to sleep, she would wake up in a cold sweat, her chest tight, and her eyes full of tears. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would sit up in bed with a lost look on her face, as if she were seeing something no one else could see. Mom, she said one night, her voice trembling, I think I saw something when I was there, during the time they say I was dead. Doña Isabel, who was already asleep next to her daughter, woke up with a start. What did you see, my child? I don't know how to explain it, Michaela replied, her eyes filled with tears. It was a dark place, but I wasn't afraid. I heard voices. I didn't know anyone, but I felt they were close by, and I didn't want to go back. Her mother sat down next to her and stroked her hair. Everything is fine, my child. You are here with us now. That's what matters. But for Michaela, it wasn't that easy. The dreams kept coming back. Sometimes she saw a long road with strong winds and dry trees. Other times she heard someone whispering her name, like an echo. And when she woke up, she felt an emptiness that left her paralyzed for hours. The doctors said it was mental confusion after trauma, but Michaela knew it was more than that. She could feel it. She had seen something on the other side. She didn't know what, but it was there. Something that had stayed inside her ever since. One day, Julian came home with a box full of school supplies. The school sent this for you. The students wrote little letters and drew pictures. They all ask when you're coming back. Michaela looked at the papers fondly, but soon pushed them aside. I'm not going back to school. What? But you love teaching. You always said it was your mission. She shook her head slowly. I loved it. But now I feel like that life is gone. I'm a different person, Julian. I almost left. I can't go into that classroom anymore and pretend nothing happened. He wanted to insist, but the pain in her eyes was clear. It was as if the place where she had been for a few minutes had taken a part of her away forever. "Are you afraid?" "I feel empty. It's worse than being afraid." Michaela spent her days in silence, sometimes sitting in the courtyard looking at the sky, trying to understand what she had experienced. At night, she wrote single words in an old notebook: dark, voice, distant light, quiet, cold, I don't want to go back. The simple life, the laughter in the classroom, the plans with Julian, everything seemed like a memory from another life, and she still didn't know if she would ever find the person she once was. Inside, Michaela was still alive, but her soul still walked silently through a place where few had gone and returned. Doña Isabel saw her daughter there every day, sitting in the same corner of the house, her gaze lost, as if she were far away, even though she was so close. Michaela hardly spoke. She spent hours looking at the plants in the courtyard, slowly moving the dry earth with her fingers, as if she wanted to blend in with it. She seemed to be waiting for something, but even she didn't know what. Doña Isabel, who had always been a woman of faith, no longer knew what to say. She prayed silently every night, asking God to bring back not only her daughter's body, but also her soul. That smiling, strong girl, so eager to live, was now hidden behind tired eyes, and a sadness she did not speak aloud. One afternoon, while preparing anise tea, Doña Isabel sat down next to Michaela and gently took her hand. "Daughter, do you remember Doña Marta, that lady who sold sweets at the market? Her daughter is a psychologist and now lives nearby. She came back from Houston to take care of her mother." Michaela did not respond. She just kept watching the wind move the leaves. She's quiet. She speaks softly. She's not one of those people who asks a lot of questions. She just listens. "Maybe, just maybe, you could talk to her, just to try." "I don't need help," Michaela replied, without changing her tone of voice. "I just need time. I know you need time, my love, but sometimes we also need someone to listen to what's stuck inside us," said her mother, touching her chest with her hand. "I know you. I know you keep everything inside, but that pain is hurting you." Michaela closed her eyes and felt a lump in her throat. Her mother's words entered her like a whisper. It wasn't pressure. It was care. It was love. "And if I don't know what to say," she whispered, "then just listen. Sit there. Let her talk. Or stay silent. Sometimes just being with someone who understands helps. You don't have to explain anything, daughter. You just need to try." Michaela's hand gently squeezed her mother's. "It's okay. I can try." Doña Isabel blushed, moved, hugged her daughter tightly, and stood there smelling her hair like when she was little. "You're strong, Michaelita, but even the strong need to rest. Let someone help you carry this, even if it's just a little bit." At that moment, there was no cure, no miracle, just two women sitting next to each other, one trying to live again, and the other holding her tight so she wouldn't get lost along the way. The office was simple, with soft-colored walls and a shelf full of books and small potted plants. The chair where Michaela sat was comfortable, but she was always a little tense, her hands clasped in her lap, not knowing where to start. The psychologist, a woman with a calm voice named Mariana, spoke little. She let the silence fill the space until Michaela uttered a few words. That afternoon, the rain was falling softly outside. It was the kind of rain that gently tapped on the roof tiles like a caress. Michaela had her eyes closed. Mariana guided her with soft words, asking her to let the memories come without forcing them, without fear. "Try to imagine a place that brings back a memory," Mariana said. At first there was only darkness, but suddenly something began to form in Michaela's mind. It was a large field with tall grass, a cloudy sky, and a cold wind blowing in her face. And in the middle of that field was a little girl with dark hair tied in two messy pigtails. She was sitting on the ground hugging her knees, crying softly. Her clothes were dirty with dirt, and her eyes were full of fear. Michaela felt her heart tighten. "I'm seeing a little girl," she said, her voice breaking. "Kia, who is that girl?" Mariana asked calmly. "It's me." Tears began to flow, even though her eyes were closed. Michaela saw that scene as if it were real. I felt the same pain I felt when I was a child. I remembered the smell of wet earth, the emptiness in my chest, the cold that came not only from the wind, but from within. I was waiting for someone, my dad. He said he would come back, but he never did. The image became clearer. The girl would lift her head from time to time, looking toward the road, hoping to see the shadow of someone familiar, but the field remained empty. I stayed there for hours until my mom found me. I didn't tell her anything. I pretended that everything was fine. Mariana was silent for a moment. Then she spoke gently. Sometimes what we don't cry about when we're children stays with us for the rest of our lives. Michaela slowly opened her eyes. She was crying, but just now it wasn't just sadness. It was as if something inside her had broken and begun to be released. I never talked about this with anyone, not even myself. But today you spoke, said Mariana, smiling with her eyes. And that's already a big step, Michaela. That day, as she left the session, Michaela looked up at the still cloudy sky and took a deep breath. Her chest hurt, but she also felt lighter. The girl in that field was still crying, but now she was no longer alone. Later, she tried to do the same thing alone at home. The memory came like a bolt of lightning that cuts through the sky without warning. It was as if something had been unlocked inside her. She sat on the edge of the bed, put her hand on her chest, and with her eyes closed, she let the images come, and they came. She saw herself at age 5, sitting on the terrace of the old house, her feet dangling in the air, and a doll in her lap. Her dad, a tall man with an easy smile and the smell of cigarettes mixed with cheap perfume, knelt in front of her and held her face with both hands. "My love, Daddy has to go away for a little while. Is that okay?" "Where?" asked the little girl with innocent eyes. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. He gave her a quick kiss on the forehead and said, "I'll be back soon. Take care of Mom." Yes, she just nodded her head, not understanding much. She thought it was just a trip, but that day, he didn't come back. Hours turned into days. Days turned into months. Doña Isabel cried in secret, thinking that Micaela couldn't see her, but she could see and feel. Her father's absence grew inside her like a hole, and no one ever explained properly what had happened. They just said, "He left. Only God knows where he is." Michaela, still a little girl, began to believe that it was her fault, that maybe she had done something wrong, maybe she wasn't good enough for him to stay. She grew up with that silence, and that silence turned into fear. Fear of being left, fear of trusting, fear of giving herself completely. Now an adult, with tears in her eyes and a tight chest, Michaela saw that scene as if she were there. The hurried hug, her father's smell, the words that seemed like affection, but were a farewell. She whispered softly, as if talking to that little girl from the past. "It wasn't your fault. You were just a child." And there, alone in her room, crying as she hadn't cried in a long time, Michaela felt that she had finally touched an old, hidden pain that had always been there. It was the root of many things, of sadness, of insecurity, of that feeling of emptiness that she never knew how to explain. Her father left and never came back, but now she could begin to return to herself. After that memory, Michaela felt as if a door inside her had suddenly opened, and everything that had been hidden for years began to come out, all at once. It wasn't easy. It was like reliving old wounds that she didn't even know still hurt. She began to remember things she had buried so deep that she thought they would never resurface. She remembered nights when she would curl up in bed, waiting for her mother to come back from the store, thinking that she was going to leave her too. She remembered when she avoided getting too attached to people, for fear that they would leave without warning. She remembered how many times she held back the urge to cry, telling herself that she couldn't bother anyone, that she had to be strong, that she was a big girl now. During a conversation with Mariana, the psychologist, she finally let it all out. She talked non-stop, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I never understood why it was so hard for me to open up," she said, crying. "Why I closed myself off when someone got close to me. I was always afraid of being left again, of giving love and having the person disappear like he did." Mariana listened attentively, not interrupting, just letting Michaela release everything she had kept inside for so many years. "When I died, when I went to that strange place, I felt a peace I had never felt here. It was as if I were far away from everything and everyone, far away from the pain, too. That's why I didn't want to come back, because living hurts, and I had forgotten what it was like to really live. Michaela's face was wet with tears, but there, in that pain, there was also relief, because for the first time she was seeing, clearly, what had always hurt her. The abandonment was not only from her father, it was the constant fear of losing the one she loved, the fear of trusting, the fear of needing someone. She understood that she had spent her life trying to protect herself. She put on an armor, became a strong woman on the outside, but full of cracks on the inside. And when she almost died, what really broke was that armor. And now was the time to rebuild herself, but without hiding anything. "I'm tired of running away," she said, looking at Mariana with eyes full of truth. "I just want to truly live this time, even if it hurts." And in that moment, without applause, without cameras, Michaela took a huge step, an invisible but powerful step. That was the beginning of the healing she so desperately needed. It was late. The sky was beginning to change color, turning from orange to gray. Julian and Michaela were sitting side by side in the backyard. She was silent, with a light blanket over her legs. He was playing with his hands as if searching for courage between his fingers. The silence had lasted several minutes, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes before an important conversation. Julian looked at the ground for a while, took a deep breath, and then spoke in a low voice. "I need to tell you something, Mika." She turned slowly toward him, without haste, just with attention. Julian swallowed. "When you were dead, I was completely lost." Michaela just listened without interrupting. I would sit in the hospital hallway and stare into space. I went days without eating properly, without sleeping. I didn't want to see anyone. Seeing you in that lifeless state broke me in a way I had never felt before. He paused, as if the words hurt as they came out. I thought about leaving everything behind. One night I left the hospital and walked to the highway. I stood there in the dark. Cars passed by, and I wondered if it was still worth going on because, without you, everything lost its meaning. Michaela took a deep breath. I didn't expect that. But she didn't say anything. She just let him continue. I had ugly thoughts, Mika. Dark thoughts. I felt anger toward the hospital, toward the doctors, toward God, even toward myself, because I felt I should have been stronger, that I should have felt something, should have screamed louder when they said you were gone. He turned his face toward her, his eyes filled with tears. But later, when I found out you were alive, I felt guilty, very guilty, because while you were fighting to come back, I almost gave up. Michaela reached out and took his hand. She squeezed it lovingly, but firmly. The two of them stayed like that for a while, without rushing, without hurrying. "You didn't do anything wrong, Julian," she said softly. "You suffered, and we all suffer differently. I also went to a dark place, and if you thought about leaving, it's because your pain was so great. I understand." Julian cried silently with his head bowed, and Michaela, for the first time in a long time, rested her head on his shoulder. There, at that moment, there was no right or wrong, only two hearts that had gone through hell and were now slowly trying to beat together again. Meanwhile, at the hospital, news arrived on a simple sheet of paper folded in half, delivered by a hospital secretary with a serious expression. Ernesto Salgado read the document calmly, but inside, it was as if the ground had been pulled out from under his feet. There was no detailed explanation, not even a fair meeting. It just said that as of that day, his services would no longer be needed. He put the paper in his coat pocket and walked slowly out of the hospital. He passed through the hallway where he used to drink coffee, the dining room where he told jokes with his colleagues, the room where he sat so many times listening to sad stories, accidents, goodbyes. But now, everything was different. Strange looks, whispers in the corners, doors slamming shut. Although he saved Michaela's life, Ernesto was treated like a problem because he didn't follow protocol, because he shouted in the morgue, because he felt something that the papers couldn't explain. He didn't regret it, but it hurt. It hurt a lot. When he left the building and felt the wind on his face, he stood there, looking at the sky, not knowing where to go. He ran his hand through his hair. Tired, he took a deep breath. Later that day, he went to Doña Isabel's house. He wanted to say goodbye. He knocked on the gate, carefully. Micaela was sitting on the terrace. When she saw him, she tried to smile, but her eyes noticed that something was wrong. Did something happen? Ernesto took the paper out of his pocket and handed it to her without saying anything. Julián, who was nearby, took the paper, read it, and said angrily, "This is crazy. You saved his life. The hospital prefers to pretend it didn't make a mistake," Ernesto replied, trying to sound calm. "And to them, I was the problem. I only did what my heart told me to do, but that doesn't fit in the reports." Micaela got up and approached him slowly. She took his hand affectionately. "You saved me, doctor, and no one can take that away from you. Not a piece of paper, not a job, not a uniform." He smiled, moved. "Thank you, Micaela. That alone is worth more than any diploma on the wall." Doña Isabel appeared at the door, drying her hands on her apron. "Come in, doctor. Have some coffee with us. No one will rush you out of here." And so it was, in a simple house, with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and homemade bread, that Ernesto found something that was not in any contract: gratitude. His name may have been removed from the payroll, but it was forever etched in the hearts of that family, and no hospital in the world could erase that. The days passed slowly. Although her mother cared for her lovingly, although Julián was attentive and the psychologist listened to her, Micaela still felt a weight on her chest that would not go away. It was as if something was pending, as if a part of her story was still poorly told, without an ending. Every time she closed her eyes, that image from her childhood came back. The little girl alone in the field, her father saying he would come back, and the silence that followed. One morning, while washing her face in the bathroom sink, she looked in the mirror longer than usual. She stared at herself, with dark circles under her eyes and eyes full of questions. She went down to the kitchen where Doña Isabel was making coffee and bread on the griddle. "Mom, I need to do something." Doña Isabel turned calmly, already recognizing that tone of voice. "Tell me, daughter." "I need to find my dad." Her mother remained silent. The smell of coffee filled the air. She put the spoon down in the sink and looked her in the eyes. "Why now?" "Because if I don't understand what happened to him, I won't be able to understand myself. I was between life and death, Mom, and when I came back incomplete. I've felt this absence since I was a child, and now I don't want to run away from it anymore." Julian, who had been listening from the living room, approached slowly. "Do you know where to start?" Micaela shrugged. "No, but I'm going to find out. And if he's alive, I want to look him in the eyes and ask him why. And if he's not, at least I want to know where he ended up. I need to close this hole I have inside me," she said, placing her hand on her chest. Doña Isabel took a deep breath, lowered her head for a moment, as if swallowing an old cry, and then said, "Then go. Go carefully, but go, because no one deserves to live with half a soul." Julián looked at Micaela fondly. "I'm coming with you. Wherever you go, I'll go with you." She smiled slightly for the first time in days. "And I want Dr. Ernesto to come too. He's already part of this. He was the one who brought me back, and I want him to see where my story began." The next day, they began to pack a simple backpack with a few clothes, some old papers kept by Doña Isabel, and an old photo of Micaela's father, yellowed by time. And before leaving, Micaela stood at the door, looked around, and said firmly, "I don't want to live on the run anymore. Now I'm going to look for the answers, even if they hurt." And so, with a heavy heart, but full of courage, Micaela began the most difficult journey of her life, the search for who she was, through the story of who was gone. The road was long, with the open sky and the smell of earth in the air. Micaela sat in the front seat, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her hair tied back in a simple bun, her fet serious. Next to her, Julian drove with both hands on the wheel and a heavy heart. In the back seat, Ernesto looked out the window at the road, silent, as if thinking about everything he had experienced in recent months. The trip was quiet at first. No one knew quite what to say, but little by little, the bonds grew stronger. Julián and Ernesto, who had hardly known each other before, began to talk, then laugh a little, then tell stories about their lives. Two very different men, united by the same woman and by a pain that affected them in different ways. "Did you know I've never traveled with a medical examiner before?" Julian joked, trying to break the ice. Ernesto smiled a little, and I never imagined sharing a mission with the husband of a patient who almost, well, you know. Michaela laughed softly for the first time on the road. That simple sound filled the car with hope. After a few hours of driving on dirt roads, they arrived at an almost forgotten village, where the houses were made of mud and the doors were always open. They were tired, hungry, and needed to rest. They went into a small store to buy water and bread. That's where they met Doña Remedios, a woman with sunburnt skin and lively eyes, who hadn't stopped looking at Michaela since she walked in. "You," said the woman, approaching slowly. "Whose daughter are you, child?" Michaela turned around, surprised. "My name is Michaela Ramirez. My father's name was Tomas. He disappeared many years ago." Doña Remedios opened her eyes wide and grabbed Michaela's hand tightly. "Tomas Ramirez. Tall, dark hair, sad eyes. Yes, that's him." The woman was silent for a moment, then looked intently into Michaela's eyes. "I knew that man. He passed through here a few years ago. He worked cutting wood on an abandoned ranch near the river. He was quiet, but he always carried a photo in his pocket of a girl with 2 pigtails. Michaela's breath caught in her throat. Julian took her hand. Ernesto stepped forward attentively. "Do you remember where that place is?" he asked. "Of course I do. Few people go there, but I can show you the way. It's about 2 leagues from here. You'll need courage." That place was very quiet. Michaela took a deep breath. Her eyes were filled with tears. It was as if she were close to a part of her father for the first time. "Let's go now." And so, with their hearts beating fast and the past drawing ever closer, the 3 of them set off again, now more than ever together, united by an old pain and by a hope that was finally beginning to take shape. The road to the ranch was narrow, full of rocks and tall grass on either side. The road seemed endless, and the silence inside the car was as loud as the silence outside. Michaela looked out the window, feeling her heart beat like never before. Julian drove carefully, very attentively, and Ernesto was silent, as if respecting a sacred moment. When they arrived, they saw a crooked wooden fence that was almost falling down, and an old sign with no name swaying in the wind. The ranch was there, frozen in time, with broken windows, a roof full of holes, and silence. The kind of silence that says more than any words. Michaela was the first to get out. She walked slowly to the front door, pushed it open carefully, and went inside. The wood creaked, and the smell of dampness and forgotten time filled the air. It was like stepping into an old memory. Julian and Ernesto followed behind her, but they stayed a little way back, letting her follow her heart. Inside the ranch, there was a rocking chair in one corner, a table with glass marks, an old radio covered in dust. Michaela slowly ran her hand over the furniture, feeling every detail, as if that place were speaking to her in silence. It was then that she saw a cardboard box half hidden under a broken bed. She knelt down carefully and pulled it toward her. When she opened it, the smell of time became stronger. Inside were yellowed letters, a carefully folded shirt, and a photo. She grabbed the photo with trembling hands. It was her as a child, with 2 pigtails and the blue dress she wore the day her father left. Next to the photo was a piece of paper folded many times. It was a letter. Michaela opened it carefully. The handwriting was his. "My daughter, if you ever find this, I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I just thought that my presence was doing you more harm than good. I was a coward, yes, but I thought that by disappearing, I was sparing you the pain of having a broken father. Forgive me. Your dad, Tomas." The tears flowed uncontrollably. She hugged the letter to her chest, as if she were hugging her dad. She sat on the dirt floor crying like she hadn't cried in years. Julian approached, knelt beside her, and put his hand on her back. "He thought he was taking care of you, Mika, but all I wanted was for him to stay," she said through her tears. Ernesto entered slowly, saw the scene, and stood there in silence. He knew that this pain did not need words, only company. There, In that old, forgotten ranch, Michaela found what she was looking for. It wasn't just her father. It was the truth. It was the answer. It was proof that she was never abandoned because of a lack of love, but because of the fear of someone who felt too small to be a father. And although her heart ached, she felt more complete, because now, at least, she knew. Still in the ranch, with its dirt floor and still air, Michaela continued to carefully examine the few things that remained there. Among folded papers and old clothes, her fingers touched something different, a blue notebook worn by time with frayed edges. When she opened it, she saw her father's handwriting, small and cramped, as if each word had been written with fear of taking up too much space. It was a diary. She sat down in a corner of the room, hugged the notebook to her chest for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and began to read. The first pages talked about normal days, hard work, heavy rains, and lonely nights. But soon, the tone of the writing changed. Her father began to talk about her. Today, I dreamed about Michaela. She was calling me. I woke up with a heavy heart. I miss my little girl. I hide from the world because I don't want her to see me like this. Weak, lost. I have nothing to offer. I left my daughter thinking it was the right thing to do, that without me she would have a better chance at happiness. But now, I don't know if I did the right thing. All I know is that it hurt. Michaela kept reading page after page, unable to hold back her tears. Her father's words cut like knives and embraced her at the same time. There was so much pain written there, but also so much love. Hidden love, ashamed love, love afraid of being a burden. She came to a part that made her tremble inside. I want you to know that I never left because I didn't love you. That's when Michaela couldn't take it anymore. She cried like a little girl, like the little girl who sat waiting in the field, like the woman who carried years of silence in her chest. The diary fell into her lap and she brought her hands to her face, trying to hold back a pain that came from far away. Julian knelt beside her and hugged her tightly. Ernesto stayed a little further away, but he didn't leave. Everyone knew that this moment was hers alone. The sun was slowly setting in the sky when Michaela, Julian, and Ernesto made their way back to the village. The silence inside the car was profound, but different from other days. It was a silence filled with thoughts, filled with emotion. Michaela still held her father's diary in her hands, as if it were something very valuable, as if she could still hear the voice she had always wanted to hear inside it. When they arrived at the village, Doña Remedios was waiting for them on the sidewalk, sitting on a wooden bench with her eyes downcast. As soon as she saw Michaela get out of the car, she stood up with difficulty and walked slowly toward her. "Come here, child." Michaela approached and took the woman's hands, feeling something strange in her chest. "Doña Remedios, what happened?" The woman took a deep breath, wiped her face as if holding back tears, and spoke softly and carefully. "I spoke to some people when you came. Your father, he passed away recently, just a few weeks ago." Michaela was in shock. "What?" It was peaceful. My daughter was silent. He fell asleep and never woke up. He was lonely, but respectful. He never caused any trouble. He stayed mostly on the ranch, quiet. The words hit her like a cold wind. Michaela put her hand to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. "I arrived too late. I read the letters and the diary." "No," said Doña Remedios tenderly. "You arrived just in time to understand. He's gone." "Yes, but he left everything there for you. The diary, the memories, the regrets. He loved you. He just didn't know how to show it. They buried him right there on the ranch, by a little path next to the footpath." Julian approached and hugged Michaela tightly from behind. Ernesto bowed his head in respect. No one said anything else. They just stood there together while she cried. It was a quiet, painful cry, but different. It was the cry of someone who understands, who accepts, who lets go. At that moment, she knew she would never see her father with her own eyes again, but she felt that she had found him on the ranch, in the letters, in the words he had left so carefully. Yes, he died alone, but not forgotten. Michaela had found him, and although there was no hug, no reunion, no goodbye, something inside her closed with peace. And sometimes that's all it takes to move on. The sun had not even risen properly when Michaela asked to return to the ranch. This time, she wanted to go alone. Julian and Ernesto respected her silence. They knew it was a moment that only she could experience. She walked slowly along the dirt road, with her father's diary pressed against her chest and a simple flower in her hands. It was a wild flower picked along the way, with small white petals. When she got close to the ranch, she went behind the house until she found a small mound of earth covered with stones and a piece of wood scratched with a knife. There, with no name written on it, was Tomas's makeshift grave. Michaela stood in front of the spot and stayed there for a while, looking quietly. The wind blew softly, ruffling her hair and making the flower tremble between her fingers. She bent down slowly and placed the flower on the grave with all the care in the world, like someone touching a wound that has already closed but still hurts. She remained silent for a long time. Then, her voice breaking and her eyes filled with tears, she said, "I don't hate you anymore, Dad. I just wanted you to hug me." And in that moment, the weight she had carried for so many years seemed to fall to the ground, along with her tears. There was no audience, no applause, no novelistic reunion. There was only a daughter standing in front of her father's resting place, saying with an open heart what she had kept inside since she was a child. "I waited for you for so long. I waited for a letter, a hug, a sign, and now I understand. You were lost too." She placed her hand on the ground as if she wanted to touch her father through it. "I forgive you, and more than that, I leave you in peace. Go in peace, Dad." The wind blew harder. Michaela closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of the countryside, old wood, and fresh flowers mingled with the memory of the hug she never had. But now, somehow, she felt. She got up calmly, wiped her face with her hands, and looked at the grave once more. "Now I can go back." And she left quietly, her heart lighter than ever, because sometimes the hug we wait for comes when we learn to let go. The drive home was peaceful. The car moved slowly around the curves in the road, and this time there was no rush. Julian drove with one hand on the wheel and the other in his lap, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror to check on Michaela in the back seat. Ernesto sat silently beside him with his hat resting on his chest. Michaela looked out the window, seeing the world through different eyes. The trees looked greener, the sky bigger, and the wind coming in through the window brought a smell she hadn't smelled in a long time. The smell of life. She was silent. Yes, but it was a light silence, different from the silence of the last few months. It was the silence of someone who was breathing deeply inside. When she arrived at her mother's house, Doña Isabel was already waiting for her on the terrace. When she saw her daughter get out of the car, she dropped the dishcloth on the ground and ran towards her, hugging her tightly. The two stood there hugging, saying nothing, just feeling. Michaela rested her face on her mother's shoulder and said, quietly, "I found what I needed, Mom. Not as I imagined, but I found it." They went inside together, and for the first time in a long time, Michaela went to the mirror in the living room, stood in front of it, and looked at herself. Her eyes were still tired, but there was a different sparkle in them, a kind of peace that comes after the storm. She ran her hand through her hair, adjusted her blouse, and smiled. It was a small, shy smile, but it was real. The first one after everything. Julian saw it and felt his eyes fill with tears. Ernesto, leaning against the door, noticed it too. That smile said more than 1,000 words. "You look different, Mika," said Julian, his voice breaking. "Yes," she replied, "but for the first time, I like what I see here." The afternoon passed slowly. The smell of coffee filled the house. The table was set, and conversation flowed little by little, like someone learning to live again. Michaela no longer shied away from questions or hid in silence. Now her every gesture had presence. She was completely present, and at the end of the day, as the sun set behind the mountains and the sky turned pink and gold, Michaela stayed alone on the terrace for a while, looking at everything calmly. She smiled again, and this time her eyes were alive, and now she was also at peace. The end of the afternoon was already blending into night when Michaela and Julian were left alone in the kitchen. The house was silent. Doña Isabel had already gone to bed early, and Ernesto had said goodbye after dinner with a discreet smile and a respectful, "See you later." Julian was washing the dishes, and Michaela, leaning against the door, just watched him. His eyes, once filled with sadness, now looked calmer. She approached slowly, came up behind him and hugged him, pressing her face against his back. "Thank you for not leaving," she whispered. He dried his hands with the towel, turned around, and hugged her too. But this time it was not just any hug. It was long, strong, silent. A reunion hug. They were no longer the same couple they had been before. They were two survivors, two mended souls, but stronger, more truthful, with more love. "I thought I had lost you forever," he said, his voice breaking. "You found me," replied Michaela, looking him in the eyes. They stayed there, close together, breathing together. Later, sitting on the living room couch, Julian picked up an old notebook with some notes in it. He showed it to Michaela, feeling a little embarrassed. "I started writing some things about all this, about you and what we went through. I don't know if it's a book or just a way to let off steam, but I needed to get it out." She opened the notebook, carefully leafed through the first few pages, and read the words written in tight handwriting, full of emotion. It spoke of the death that did not happen, of Ernesto's cry, of Doña Isabel's faith, of the pain of not understanding, of the fear of losing, of the journey in search of answers, and of the reunion with one's own soul. "This is beautiful, Julian. It's real. I want the world to know what you went through, that there is pain, but there is also strength, that even when everything seems to be ending, life still finds a way to come back." Michaela smiled and put her hand on his. "Then write everything. And if you're going to tell it as it was, with all the tears, with all the silences, with the love that remained standing." He agreed with his eyes, and there, in that simple room, full of memories and the smell of coffee, a new story began, written with truth, written with love, written by someone who lived through it all and still decided to go on. Ernesto Salgado was sitting on the terrace of his house, a cup of coffee in his hands and a lost look in his eyes. Since he left the hospital, the days had been calmer, but also full of questions. He had saved a life, and yet they treated him as if he had done something wrong. The dismissal hurt him, not because of pride, but because of how it all happened. Still, he knew he would do the same thing again if necessary, because there, in that cold room, it was his heart that spoke loudest. The phone rang one morning like any other. It was an unfamiliar but respectful voice. "Dr. Ernesto, we are calling from the Texas School of Medicine. We heard about the case of patient Michaela Ramirez. We would very much like you to come and share your experience with our students." Ernesto was silent for a second, surprised. "You want me to tell the story?" "Yes, doctor. The way you acted inspires us. That's what our students need to hear. Humanity and medicine." On the day of the talk, he entered the auditorium wearing a simple shirt, dark pants, and carrying a folder with some papers. The place was packed. Students, doctors, teachers, all waiting to hear from the man who, without following cold protocols, saved a life. He told the whole story without embellishment. From the moment he received the body to the moment he felt Michaela's pulse, he spoke of doubt, of fear, of the scream in the morgue. He also spoke of the price he paid for listening to his heart. Medicine needs technique, of course, but it needs even more to listen, to be present, to feel when something is not right. And that day, I felt it. At the end, they gave him a standing ovation. People stood up, moved, touched by the simple truth of his words. After that, other invitations came, from other universities, conferences, interviews. Ernesto's name began to be spoken with respect among professionals, and soon job offers came in from places that valued not only his resume, but also the value of someone who does not close his eyes to a patient's pain. One day, sitting on the terrace of his house again, he received a letter in the mail. It was from Michaela. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. "If I am alive today, it is because you trusted in something that is not taught in books. Thank you for not giving up." Ernesto held the letter fondly, looked up at the sky, and smiled with tears in his eyes. He didn't need a badge. He already had the most important thing, the recognition of the person who mattered most. the life he saved, and the peace of knowing he did the right thing. The classroom was filled with rows of desks, the smell of new chalkboards mixed with the sweet scent of flowers in the window. It was the same school as always, but that day everything felt different. The students sat in silence, their eyes curious and their hearts racing. Some whispered among themselves. Others stared straight at the door, waiting for the moment that seemed like a dream, the return of teacher Michaela. When she entered, the noise stopped instantly. She stood there, her hair simply tied back, wearing a light blue blouse and a smile that conveyed more than joy. It conveyed courage. She walked to the front of the classroom, placed her books on the table, and looked calmly at each little face. Her eyes sparkled. "Good morning, my darlings." The children responded softly, some with tears in their eyes. A boy in the front row raised his hand timidly. "Teacher, are you okay?" Michaela stepped forward and sat on the edge of the desk. She took a deep breath before answering. "I'm better. I'm alive and I'm very happy to be here with you." She looked at the blackboard, picked up the chalk, but instead of writing the lesson, she wrote a sentence in large, neat letters. "Life sometimes hurts, but it's still worth it." She turned to the group and said in a firm but emotional voice, "I've learned something during this time. Sometimes life is scary. We go through such difficult times that we want to stop, we want to hide. But living again, even if it's scary, even if it hurts, is worth it. Because there is always someone waiting for us. There is always a hug, a kind word, a new beginning." Some children remained silent, their eyes filled with tears. Others smiled without understanding everything, but feeling what was most important. Her presence there, firm, human, real. And I promise you that from now on, every class will be more than just learning tasks. It will be about remembering that you can start over as many times as you need to. A little girl got up, walked to the front of the classroom, and hugged Michaela tightly. Soon others came. It was a line of hugs, one by one, and there, surrounded by little arms full of love, she cried. But it was a soft, beautiful cry, the cry of someone who had overcome pain and returned to life. That day, there was no math class and no homework, but everyone learned the most important lesson, that even after darkness, the sun always finds a way to shine again. The afternoon came slowly with that sky painted orange, pink and gold, that only appears when the day ends peacefully. At the top of the hill, just behind the simple house where Michaela grew up, she and Doña Isabel sat side by side on a wooden bench that her father had made when she was little. The two watched the sunset in silence, their feet touching the ground, and the wind gently blowing through their hair. Doña Isabel held a cup of hot tea in her hands. Michaela, with a light blanket over her shoulders, kept her eyes on the horizon. The silence between them was not due to a lack of topics. It was presence. It was understanding. It was love that did not need many words. The sun was setting slowly, as if it knew that something special was happening there. Michaela took a deep breath, smelling the scent of wet earth, listening to the song of the crickets that were already beginning. This was not just the end of a day. It was the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. She turned slowly, looked at her mother, and with tears in her eyes but the most peaceful smile she had ever given, whispered, "I'm alive, Mom, and now I'm free too." Doña Isabel grabbed her daughter's hand tightly and closed her eyes, overcome with emotion. She said nothing, just rested her head on Michaela's shoulder. It was everything she had ever wanted to hear. More than the return of her daughter was knowing that she now belonged to herself, that after so much pain, so much darkness, Michaela had finally returned to herself. The sun hid behind the mountains, leaving the sky with the last colors of the day. And on that wooden bench, with a clean heart and full of courage, Michaela ended the greatest journey of her life. A journey that began with the silence of death and ended with the freedom to truly live. Now tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Michaela's place? Or in Julian's? Would you have forgiven? Would you have pursued the past? I really want to know how this story made you feel. And don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss the next videos, because there are many stories coming that will move you. Oh, and before you leave, click on the video that's appearing on the screen. It's a true story that has already made many people cry and think about life. You can't miss it. Click on it and watch it.